Can you imagine a secret so dark, so fundamentally wrong, that hearing it from the innocent lips of your own grandchild forces you to pick up the phone and call the police on your own flesh and blood? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I had to call the police on my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, after my sweet granddaughter, barely old enough to tie her shoes, revealed something that completely shattered our family. Tell me, in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have protected your family at all costs, or would you have done what I did? Let me take you back to how this all began, because I promise you, no one saw this coming. My son, Mark, met Sarah in college. They were head over heels for each other, the kind of young love you read about in books. I adored Sarah from the moment I met her. She was vivacious, charming, and seemed to genuinely love Mark, which, as a mother, is all you ever want for your child. They got married a few years after graduation, a beautiful, sun-drenched ceremony in a vineyard, and I remember thinking how truly blessed my family was. Life seemed perfect. A few years later, my granddaughter, Lily, arrived. Oh, Lily. She was, and still is, the light of my life. A tiny bundle of joy with big, curious eyes and a laugh that could chase away any storm cloud. Being a grandmother was everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I loved spending time with her. Mark and Sarah were, by all appearances, a happy couple, devoted parents. They lived a comfortable life, both working in decent jobs, and their home always felt warm and inviting. I visited frequently, often babysitting Lily while Mark and Sarah went out for date nights or even just to run errands. It was during these visits that I started noticing little things, subtle shifts that, at the time, I brushed off as nothing. Sarah became increasingly withdrawn over the past year or so. She was always glued to her phone, often disappearing into another room to take calls or send messages. When I'd ask her about it, she'd just wave it off, saying it was work stuff or just catching up with friends. I tried not to pry. I respect people's privacy, and I knew working mothers had a lot on their plates. But it wasn't just the phone. She started becoming very particular about certain things. For instance, there was a small, locked chest in her and Mark's bedroom. It was always there, tucked away in the corner, and I never thought anything of it until one day, Lily, being the curious little explorer she was, pointed to it and asked, "What's in there, Grandma?" Sarah, who was in the room at the time, immediately snatched Lily up, her voice surprisingly sharp as she said, "That's Mommy's special box, sweetie. We don't touch Mommy's special things." It was a small incident, but it stuck with me. Sarah was never usually that stern with Lily. Mark, bless his heart, was oblivious. Or at least, he appeared to be. He was focused on his job, on providing for his family, and he trusted Sarah implicitly. He'd sometimes joke about her secret life with her phone, but it was always in good humor, never with any real suspicion. I mentioned my observations to him once, very gently, just saying, "Is everything all right with Sarah? She seems a little preoccupied lately." He just shrugged and said, "Oh, you know Sarah, always got a million things going on. She's probably just stressed with work." I accepted his answer, wanting to believe it, wanting to believe that the perfect family I saw before me was truly perfect. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mark and Sarah were both at work, and I was watching Lily. We were having a lovely time, baking cookies, getting flour all over the kitchen, and laughing until our sides hurt. Lily was around 4 years old at this point, incredibly bright and articulate for her age. After our baking adventure, she was playing with her dolls in the living room while I tidied up the kitchen. She often narrated elaborate stories for her dolls, and I loved listening to her innocent imagination unfold. Suddenly, her voice, usually so light and sing-songy, dropped to a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. "Shoo, dollies," she said, "we have to be very quiet. Mommy is in her special room with the bad man again. We can't tell Daddy, because it's a secret." My heart stopped. My blood ran cold. I dropped the dish towel I was holding. "Lily, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though every fiber of my being was screaming. "What did you say about a bad man?" She looked up at me, her big eyes wide and innocent. "Mommy says it's a secret," she repeated, "but sometimes the bad man comes to our house when Daddy's at work. He goes into Mommy's special room, and Mommy says we have to be very, very quiet and stay in my room until he leaves." My mind was reeling. A special room? What was she talking about? Then it hit me. Sarah had recently converted the guest bedroom, which was rarely used, into her home office. She spent a lot of time in there, often locking the door. I had assumed she was working, taking private calls, or just needed some quiet time. But a bad man? Coming to the house when Mark wasn't there? A secret? My stomach churned. I knelt down beside Lily, trying to maintain my composure. "What does this bad man do, sweetie?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lily shrugged, playing with her doll's hair. "He talks to Mommy. And sometimes Mommy cries after he leaves. But she always tells me not to tell Daddy, because it's a very, very big secret." The pieces of the puzzle, the little things I'd noticed, started to fall into place with a sickening thud. The phone calls, the withdrawn behavior, the locked chest, Sarah's abruptness about the special box. It wasn't work stress. It was something far, far worse. An affair. But bad man? And Sarah crying? It didn't sound like a simple affair. It sounded darker, more predatory. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process what Lily had told me. I couldn't just dismiss it as a child's overactive imagination. Lily was too young to invent something so specific, so detailed. She was describing a pattern, a recurring event. I watched her play, her innocent laughter echoing through the house, and a fierce, protective instinct rose within me. My granddaughter, my son, my family, they were being hurt, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I knew I couldn't confront Sarah directly, not without more information. She would deny it, probably try to gaslight me, or even worse, lash out at Lily. I also couldn't tell Mark right away. His trust in Sarah was absolute, and he would be devastated. He deserved to know the truth, but I needed concrete proof, something undeniable. I needed to know who this bad man was, and what exactly was happening. I decided I had to investigate. It felt like something out of a detective novel, and I, a retired schoolteacher, was hardly Nancy Drew. But this was my family, and I would do anything to protect them. The next day, I found an excuse to go back to their house. I told Sarah I'd forgotten my reading glasses. While she was distracted, I subtly started looking around. I went into her home office. It was neat, organized, a typical workspace. But my eyes were drawn to the small, locked chest I had seen before. It was still there, tucked away. I didn't dare touch it. I didn't want to leave any trace. I started paying closer attention to Sarah's schedule. She had certain days where she would work from home, but would often send Mark off to his office as usual. These were the days I suspected the bad man would visit. I knew I needed to be there, to see for myself. It took me a week to orchestrate it. I told Mark I needed some help with a leaky faucet at my house, hoping to keep him occupied while Sarah was alone at their home. It worked. He spent the morning at my place, while I made my way back to his and Sarah's, parking my car a few streets away and walking the rest of the way, feeling like a spy in my own neighborhood. I approached the house cautiously, trying to be discreet. I saw Sarah's car in the driveway. I hid behind a large bush across the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt ridiculous, paranoid even, but the image of Lily's innocent face, the fear in her eyes, kept me rooted. I waited. It felt like an eternity. Then, an hour later, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. My breath hitched. A man got out. He was tall, well-dressed, in his late 40s or early 50s. Definitely not Mark. He walked confidently up to the front door and, to my horror, let himself in with a key. A key. Not a knock, not a doorbell. He had his own key to their house. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a casual fling. This was something deep, something established. I watched, my stomach twisting into knots. He was inside for about an hour. Then, just as silently as he arrived, he emerged, got back into his car, and drove away. Sarah came out moments later, looking around nervously before rushing back inside. I quickly made my way to the house, trying to appear as if I were just out for a walk. When I got inside, Sarah was in the kitchen, making herself a cup of tea, trying to act normal. But her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she held the mug. She saw me and tried to force a smile. "Oh, Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. "I just thought I'd pop by and drop off some of those cookies Lily and I made yesterday," I lied, holding up a small container. "And I wanted to see if Mark had fixed that faucet yet." She seemed to relax slightly, but the tension in the air was palpable. I could almost taste it. I knew I couldn't confront her then. Not yet. I needed more. The image of the bad man with his key was seared into my brain. This special room, the tears, the secrecy. I needed to know who he was and why he was there. Over the next few days, I became obsessed. I researched everything I could about home security. I installed a small, motion-activated camera that looked like a bird feeder in my own yard, tested it, and then, under the guise of helping Sarah with her garden, discreetly placed it in a strategic location at her house that would capture anyone entering or leaving the front door without being easily noticed. I felt guilty, like a trespasser, but the memory of Lily's words fueled my determination. I waited. The footage came in a few days later. It confirmed my worst fears. The same man, entering with his key, leaving an hour or so later. I now had photographic evidence. But who was he? And what was truly going on? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just an affair. Lily's description of him as a bad man, Sarah's tears, the locked box. It felt sinister. My mind went to the locked chest in her bedroom. I knew I had to get into it. It was a terrible invasion of privacy, but I truly believed that my family's safety was at stake. The next time I babysat Lily, I waited until she was asleep. My hands were shaking as I crept into Mark and Sarah's bedroom. I found a small set of lock-picking tools online, something I'd never imagined I'd use, and after a few fumbling attempts, the small lock on the chest clicked open. What I found inside made my blood run cold. It wasn't love letters from a secret lover. It wasn't jewelry or sentimental items. It was a collection of legal documents. Papers detailing a large sum of money being transferred from an offshore account into Sarah's name. Documents that looked suspiciously like a second marriage certificate, but with a different man's name, the bad man I had seen, and a date from 2 years ago. 2 years ago. That was after she married Mark. And alongside all this, there were threatening letters. Letters from a man named Mr. X, demanding more money, threatening to expose her if she didn't comply. He was threatening to expose her to Mark. And that's when it all clicked into place. Sarah wasn't having an affair in the traditional sense. She was a bigamist. And it seemed she was being extorted by her first husband, or possibly someone else involved in this elaborate deception. The money transfers, the bad man visiting, the secrecy, her tears. It wasn't about love, it was about a deeply entangled web of lies and what looked like potential fraud or even blackmail. My stomach dropped. Bigamy. My son, the man I raised, had been living a lie, married to a woman who was already married to someone else, and who was now seemingly being blackmailed. And Lily, my innocent grandchild. She had been exposed to this bad man, this dangerous secret. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a crime. A serious crime that put my son and granddaughter at risk. I looked at the documents, my hands trembling so violently I almost dropped them. The weight of what I had discovered was crushing. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had loved and welcomed into my family, was not who she pretended to be. My son was living a lie. My granddaughter was caught in the middle of a potentially dangerous situation. All the seemingly innocent details, the work calls, the special room, the locked box, now painted a horrifying picture. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I had proof, undeniable evidence of bigamy, potential fraud, and a threat hanging over Sarah's head that could easily spill over and harm Mark and Lily. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have confronted Sarah, risking an explosion that could tear the family apart? Would you have shown Mark the evidence, knowing it would shatter his world? Or would you have gone to the authorities, knowing that calling the police on your own daughter-in-law would change everything forever? What would you have done? I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at those documents, the truth like a bitter pill in my mouth. My first instinct was to protect Mark, to confront Sarah, to try and fix this mess quietly. But then I thought of Lily. Her innocent face, her hushed whispers about the bad man. This wasn't just about Sarah's choices, it was about the potential danger she had brought into our family. This Mr. X, whoever he was, clearly had a hold over Sarah, and if he was extorting her, what else was he capable of? Could he hurt Lily? Could he hurt Mark? I couldn't risk it. The police. That was the only answer. It was a sickening thought, a betrayal of the family I had always cherished, but it was also the only way to truly protect Mark and Lily from the unfolding disaster. I knew it would devastate Mark. It would shatter his perception of his life, his wife, everything he thought he knew. But the alternative, allowing this dangerous situation to fester, allowing him to continue living a lie, and putting Lily at risk, was unthinkable. I carefully gathered all the documents, the marriage certificate, the transfer details, the threatening letters. I took photos of everything with my phone as well, just in case. I then returned the physical documents to the chest, locking it as best I could. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach, knowing the storm that was about to break. The next morning, with a heavy heart, I drove to the local police station. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip the steering wheel. I walked inside, feeling like I was stepping into another dimension. I explained everything to the officer who greeted me, my voice wavering as I recounted Lily's words, my observations, and finally, the damning evidence I had found. I showed him the photos of the documents. He listened patiently, his expression growing increasingly serious as I spoke. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Ma'am," he said, "this is a very serious accusation. Bigamy is a crime, and if there's blackmail involved, that's another layer of criminality. We'll need to investigate this thoroughly." I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The burden of this secret had been crushing me, and now, at least, it was in the hands of people who could do something about it. The police investigation began immediately and quietly. They couldn't involve Mark or Sarah yet, not without concrete steps. They asked me to provide the security camera footage, which I did. They started tracing the offshore accounts and the man in the car. It took a few weeks during which I had to pretend everything was normal, interacting with Sarah and Mark as if I knew nothing, even while my insides churned with anxiety. It was agonizing. Finally, the day came. The police had gathered enough evidence. They confronted Sarah at her home, while Mark was at work. I wasn't there, but Mark later told me what happened. He received a frantic call from Sarah, screaming, crying, begging him to come home. When he arrived, the police were there, and Sarah was being questioned. They showed him the evidence, the second marriage certificate, the bank statements, the footage of the bad man entering their home. He was utterly blindsided, shattered. He couldn't believe it. The woman he loved, the mother of his child, had been living a double life. The truth came out in a painful, agonizing torrent. Sarah confessed everything. She had been married before, to a man she met overseas. It was a quick, impulsive marriage that she deeply regretted. She thought she had divorced him, but it turned out the divorce was never legally finalized. She had met Mark, fallen in love, and in her desperation to build a new life, she had buried the truth, hoping it would never resurface. But her first husband, the bad man, had tracked her down. He wasn't after her love, he was after her money. He had been blackmailing her for the past year, threatening to expose her bigamy to Mark, to her family, to her employer, if she didn't pay him large sums of money. That was why he had a key to the house, why he would visit when Mark was at work, why she was so secretive and withdrawn, why she cried. She was trapped, living in fear, trying to protect her new life from crumbling. The police arrested Sarah for bigamy and arrested her first husband for blackmail and extortion. The legal proceedings were long and incredibly painful. Mark was devastated. He felt betrayed, lied to, his entire world turned upside down. Lily, thankfully, was shielded from most of the ugliness, but she knew her mommy was away, and that things were different. Mark eventually filed for divorce. It was a messy, heartbreaking process, but he knew he couldn't stay with someone who had built their life on such a fundamental lie, and who had brought such danger into their home. The aftermath was a long, slow healing process. Mark struggled immensely, not just with the betrayal but with the realization that he hadn't truly known the woman he married. I was there for him, every step of the way, helping him pick up the pieces, comforting Lily, and reminding him that he was a good father and a good man, and that he deserved the truth and a life free from deceit. Sarah received a suspended sentence and probation, mostly because she was a victim of blackmail herself, and she cooperated with the authorities in prosecuting her first husband, who ended up serving jail time. She lost her job, her reputation, and her marriage. She reached out to me, to Mark, expressing deep remorse, but the trust was broken beyond repair. Lily is doing well now, she's older and thriving. She doesn't remember the bad man with the same clarity, but the fear I felt for her, the need to protect her, remains as strong as ever. This whole ordeal taught me a profound lesson about secrets, about the lengths people will go to protect them, and about the devastating consequences when they inevitably come to light. It taught me that sometimes, doing the right thing, the truly protective thing, means making incredibly difficult choices, even if it hurts the people you love in the short term. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, calling the police on my own daughter-in-law, but I truly believe it was the only way to protect my son and, most importantly, my sweet granddaughter Lily. If you were on my side, dealing with such a devastating secret, please like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, where truth triumphs over deceit, no matter how painful. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.